commentator at Bloomberg, Rosa Prince. So welcome back to both of you. So you're kicking us off with the front page. A story here about a response from the Foreign Secretary to Donald Trump's sharp criticism and sharp proposed cuts to his foreign aid body.
Yeah, so this is about USAID employees potentially being laid off in their thousands. There has overnight been action by a judge to halt that, at least for a week. But this is this very drastic attempt to cut back on international development funding from the US, which The Guardian points out accounts for $4 out of every $10 spent globally on humanitarian aid. And it's interesting, the language here from David Lammy, who is cautioning his American friends that international development lends countries a large amount of soft power. And he is criticising the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson for merging the Department for International Development with the Foreign Office, which was done back in 2020. And so sort of saying to Donald Trump, listen, we sort of did a version of this, not obviously as full-blown as what's being planned in the US, and this was damaging, so maybe don't follow our example.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, the way that this kind of criticism is framed by David Lammy, because we've seen this with a few UK government officials tiptoeing around their displeasure or disagreement with the decision that Donald Trump has made. And you really get the sense that this is a man they don't want to upset because they want to do business with him.
Absolutely. And I think that British ministers and, to be honest, politicians all over the world are trying to figure out how they manage Donald Trump and how far they can go in criticising him. Now, the British government is very committed to overseas aid, does not want this US aid to be taken apart, thinks it's a very bad thing. But I think that they've learned that they also have to kind of play nice with Donald Trump. I mean, he directly will be affected by how people talk about him. So we saw, for example, when it came to whether or not he was going to slap tariffs on other countries, he singled out Britain as one where, well, Keir Starmer was nice to me, so maybe I'll be OK with the UK, in contrast to the EU, where he said that they had been atrocious. So David Lammy, as you say, it's cautious criticism, but he certainly doesn't want to go any further than this, I would say.
Well, exactly, and especially in a week where the Bank of England halved the growth forecast for this year, they're really mindful that they don't want anything to go wrong as far as growth is concerned, and tariffs could do just that. So interesting to see how they handle this in the weeks ahead. Rosa, take us inside The Guardian now, because a story here about a big protest being planned.
Yes, that's right. So the government has slightly recalibrated its relationship with China in recent months, partly because of the growth agenda. I think they think that working with Beijing helps to encourage investment, Chinese investment. There's a lot of money swishing around there. And one of the things that has changed is that it looks like this Labour government will give permission to a new super embassy, they're calling it, which is a new Chinese embassy at Royal Mint Court, which, if you know that part of London, it's kind of near Tower Bridge. Quite a sensitive area. There are various government buildings nearby, which the security services might be worried about the Chinese listening in. Local residents don't like it because it's going to be absolutely massive, this place. And also you've got human rights objectors who say that it's not appropriate at the moment for the Chinese to get a bigger footprint in London. And they also have raised concern that there wouldn't physically be space for them to hold protests. So to sort of test that thesis, there is a big protest there today, perhaps as many as 1,000 people, and they're inviting the police to come and monitor it to see if there is sufficient area for people to sort of raise their objections to the Chinese.
And again, China is another issue where Donald Trump has taken a very firm line, and interesting to see whether or not Britain's dealings with China, again, irritate him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's obviously a lot of politics involved in this, but there's also the practical questions of how many people, fit on the pavement outside this building. And there's a strange bit in the story where it says the Metropolitan Police launched an objection to this project, warning there was not enough space to safely accommodate more than 100 protesters. But then the Chinese embassy submitted a document saying, no, there's room for 2,000. there's quite a big difference between 100 and 2,000. So it'll be very interesting to see how many actually fit and how many turn up today. The proof of the pudding will be in the protest, I suppose.
Let's move on to a story inside the Times, Shona. And this is the story of a woman who wants to find out more about her teenage son, what he was seeing on social media when he took his own life. We just spoke to this mother a short time ago. She's joining a group of parents who are taking action against TikTok.
Yeah, so there's a group of parents, as you say, who want to know what their children were looking at. They believe that their children may have been participating in dangerous challenges. And I think we've all heard, maybe not so recently, but there was a time when you could hear nothing about this challenge or that challenge on TikTok. And if you weren't on there and if you weren't a young person, it all just sounded a bit Black Mirror, what on earth is being put out there that's influencing these young people. So, and TikTok, of course, maintains it doesn't allow dangerous content. It takes these things down. But then the fact that they're allowed to become a trend and we hear about them sort of maybe speaks against that. So these parents want access to the data, which I think, would be probably very difficult for them to actually, see these influences if it is as they feared, but they don't have an automatic entitlement from that. They want answers, but obviously if they were to find out that their children have been exposed to certain content, then what happens next? They would then obviously try to establish a causal link, and it then becomes what's being discussed here, which is a wrongful death case where the site is then directly blamed and it becomes a matter of legal argument. But they're not entitled as it is to see what their children were looking at online before they die. So that's what they're wanting to change.
Yeah, and in fact, Ellen Roon, this parent, is also pushing for changes in this country to the law and has already managed to get a debate in Parliament because she had so many people backing her petition. And it feeds into a story we talked about in the last hour, Rosa, that the Home Office apparently is pushing for access to encrypted data for some Apple users on the iCloud. And again, it's all about sort of how much civil liberties versus sort of safety, and those arguments are playing out in different areas, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. TikTok haven't responded to the Times anyway.
No, they didn't respond to us either. We've tried to approach them too. They have previously talked, as Shona said, about prohibiting dangerous content, and anyone who tries to access those kind of challenges gets directed towards a sort of safety area.
So that means we don't really know what their reason is for denying the material to these grieving parents. But I have to agree with Shona. I suspect the reason is because they don't want to be liable for a whacking great court case. So as well as all the sort of privacy concerns, you've got that in the mix, the sort of kind of litigation culture, particularly in the States. Now, it feels very unempathetic to me, and nobody who watched your interview would feel anything other than extraordinary sympathy for the families who've gone through just the worst thing in the world. And you do feel like there ought to be some way that these giant corporations could be a bit more human. Perhaps there would be a way that they could have terms and conditions which meant they weren't liable. I don't know what it quite would be, but just to kind of do a computer says no, blanket, no, we're not going to release this material to you, which is what these grieving parents want, seems very harsh and unhumane.
Let's move on to the front page of the Daily Mail, Shona. They are saying hands off our cash ISAs. Who might have their hands on them?
Well, yes, does Rachel Reeves have her eyes on cash ISAs, I suppose, is the question. And what the Daily Mail is telling us is that city bosses have been pressuring and lobbying the Chancellor, basically on the implication being that these savings are lying idle. People who have a cash ISA, it's not being invested in the same way as stocks and shares ISA would be, and therefore it's not being used. But this is now the Building Societies Association issuing a strongly worded letter, which it's not known for doing, saying, that's not true, and that the knock-on effects of any reduction in the tax-free allowance for cash ISAs would mean less money flowing into banks and building societies, forcing them to restrict lending, driving up mortgage prices and potentially causing a housing market downturn. And so what's being said by the Daily Mail is it's rare for the Building Societies Association to make such a direct intervention, and is a sign of just how serious fears are that the Chancellor could wield the axe. So yeah, they're making this move because they're a bit anxious that she's listening to the people who are saying the state should not be giving a tax break for all of us to park our money in cash, which is a bit of it's an interesting way of putting it. And I think people who have cash ISAs, you know, they're perhaps not getting a particularly good deal given everything that's going on in the economy. But yeah, it's unclear whether she has her hands on the cash ISAs, but it is a notable intervention to defend them.
And also, we'd like to see more stories like this because everyone is conscious that Rachel Reeves doesn't have much cash to splash. And with the growth forecast not looking so great, are we going to get more and more stories of don't look at this area, please?
Yeah, exactly. Poor old Rachel Reeves. She hasn't got much wiggle room as it is. So all these ideas are being thrown up and she's looking at them all. I'm sure she's desperate to find an odd billion or so behind the sofa. This one would be more about driving growth and sort of getting the economy going. But she's been told no, no, no.
OK, well, Rosa and Shona, we're going to leave it there. But thank you so much for coming in this morning and talking us through the papers this morning. We do appreciate it.